in the February 27, 2025 election, you secured 46.4% of the vote with 14,765 ballots cast, cementing this victory.
I'm the sort of guy who's always happy when I'm busy. So I love being around people. I get a lot of energy talking to people and learning from people.
In your victory speech, you declared that Sudbury now has a mandate for affordable rent, affordable groceries, affordable bills, and I'm gonna fight like hell to get that done.
The story that really resonated with me, there's two of them. There was one was a senior couple. The husband, his entire pension check went towards rent. The wife's entire pension check went towards their bills, and they went to the food bank. They had no money for food at all.
The US implementing 25% tariffs on Canadian imports, and China, on the other hand, imposing 100% tariffs on Canadian agriculture products starting March 20, 2025.
Once our relationship with the Americans gets stronger, we're going to have stronger relationship with Australia, the UK, Africa, as we venture out from trade partners. So that'll be great as well. There's been some interprovincial trade barriers in place. We're finally going to start having conversations with them. I think that in the past it's been tricky, and it's fine. We could trade with the Americans. We don't have to trade back and forth. We'll put that off to another day. Well, another day's come here. So in the future, we'll be stronger.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to another brand new edition of Beyond the Borders Season 1 with me, Arjun. You are listening to us on 96.7 CKLU.ca and Radio Player Canada app. Thank you so much for listening. And everybody knows that since March 3rd till March 9 today, it's CKLU Plays Week. Plays Week is our annual fundraiser, and every dollar you contribute to help us continue providing unique content as well as amplifying local voices and supporting community initiatives. And to donate, all you have to do is visit cklu.ca, and all donations can be met at cklu.ca, and keep tuning CKLU 96.7 FM. Our station needs you. You can donate even after March 9 as well, all right? And talking about today's guest, ladies and gentlemen, today I am super proud, and we are proudly welcoming the Honorable Jamie West. Sudbury's re-elected Member of Provincial Parliament, MPP, for his third term representing the Ontario's New Democratic Party's NDP. A lifelong Sudburyan with deep blue-collar roots, Jamie first burst onto the political scene in 2018 by winning with 47.89% of the vote, and he further solidified his connection with the community with decisive re-elections in 2022. In the most recent election on February 27, 2025, he once again earned the trust of Sudbury voters by securing 46.4% of the votes. His unwavering commitment to workers' rights, community development, and economic fairness continues to resonate deeply with his constituents. Drawing from his hands-on experience as a smelter operator at Vale, his leadership at the Sudbury and District Labour Council, and academic roles at Laurentian University's Jamie's agenda is both practical and visionary. As the official opposition critic for labor, training and skill development, and passionate and leading advocate for local industries amid global pressures like the ongoing US-Canada trade tensions, is here to discuss his strategies for tackling the ongoing burning issues such as housing affordability, workplace safety, and the challenges affecting immigrants and international students as well. So all you have to do is stay tuned, and as we unpack his accomplishments, explore his plans for the future, and the questions and concerns that matter to the people of Sudbury. So without any further ado, please welcome the Honorable Jamie West. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Arjun. I really appreciate being here.
All right. First of all, congratulations on your third term, and in the February 27, 2025 election, you secured 46.4% of the vote with 14,765 ballots cast, while your closest competitors received 38.4% with 12,194 votes. Reflecting on your political journey, from your breakthrough win in 2018 with 47.89% of the vote to your decisive re-elections in 2022 with a margin exceeding 9,500 votes, what specific elements of your campaign and policy legacy do you believe resonated most with Sudbury voters this time around? And additionally, how did your commitment to workers' rights and community development play a role in cementing this victory? I want to begin from there.
Yeah, I think in 2018 when I won, it was a change election. People were tired of the Liberal government that was in place. We had issues. Primarily, they were really struggling because they had sold off Hydro One, and people were mad about hydro bills going up. And locally in Sudbury, there was the hallway medicine. It was overwhelming that every single day there was hallway medicine. Now we've seen that across the province, but Sudbury was in the lead back then under the Liberal government. So there was a change election. A lot of people, they had lost party status for the last two terms, or last, I guess, 6.5 years. They didn't have party status. They had fewer than 14 members. And so going into the 2022 election, I wanted to ensure that people would understand that they made a good decision in 2018 when they elected me. Mm-hmm. And so a great way to do that for any employment is to work really, really hard, right? And so it's a good fit for me because I was involved with social actions before. I worked full time at the smelter, but I was also president of the Labour Council. I taught at health and safety, and I'm the sort of guy who's always happy when I'm busy. And so I love being around people. I get a lot of energy talking to people and learning from people. And so I did my normal work at Queen's Park in terms of bills and debate and stuff, but also got very involved with the community. And especially as a new MPP, there's so much to learn, right? I used to joke in that first term that you're basically running in front of an avalanche while juggling chainsaws, right? It's just there's a million things coming at you, and it could be overwhelming, but I love the chaos of it. And so I think I demonstrated in that first 4 years the hard work and caring and the commitment of the community. And so people trusted me in the next election for it. And really thankful that, in this snap election, I said often during the election talking to voters, this is an election that Doug Ford intentionally called in the coldest month, the shortest daylight hours, because he was praying for a snowstorm. He was hoping to suppress the vote. So he put his thumb on the scale and kind of tied one arm behind her back. And so the outcome basically was we have almost the same party status, right? We have a majority Conservative. We have an NDP opposition. The Liberals, I'm sure they're very happy to have party status again. But the third party and the Green Party now is still independent with 2 members and one more independent member, Vale Brady, who won her election again, I think with the highest plurality of votes, which I think is very successful because Doug Ford had told her, you won't have a job after the next election.
Interesting. This snap election came at the time, as you mentioned, when Sudbury faced not only harsh winter conditions, but also, major economic uncertainty, including Vale's recent layoff of 200 workers, with voters frustrated over the 180 million election costs and rising living expenses. How did these changes shape your campaign strategy, and what do you say to those who feel this election came at the worst possible time?
It was the worst possible time. And so it's important for people to understand that in Ontario, we have planned elections every 4 years in June. Mm-hmm. So our election wasn't supposed to be not this June, but the following June. It was a year and a half early. Mm-hmm. And so Doug Ford said, well, I have to do this because of Trump. But the reality is, if you follow political news, he's been fishing for a reason since last spring to call an election. He was worried that Justin Trudeau would either step down or lose the next election, and Justin Trudeau has been blamed for a lot of provincial issues. So if you're mad that you don't have a family doctor, Well, that's the provincial responsibility, healthcare. If you're upset about hallway medicine and hospitals not being funded, and all kinds of hospitals in Southern Ontario, primarily their emergency rooms being closed, Minden Hospital in Southern Ontario, which is in conservative riding, being permanently closed, well, that's a provincial responsibility. Secondary schools, colleges, all schools are provincial responsibility. Nurses being frustrated, lack of PSWs, these are all provincial responsibilities. But because people are so upset at Justin Trudeau, Doug Ford's been able to use him as a shield and kind of have him blame for everything that's a provincial responsibility. And so I think he was looking at polls and what would happen, and he grabbed onto the threat of tariffs. Now, if you look at it from another point of view, tariffs are going to affect workers if they come through in a negative way. And what we should be doing is working together provincially between the provinces with the at the federal level with whoever the prime minister is going to be following the leadership. I think it ends tonight sometime at the federal level for the Liberals. We should all hands on deck, Canada province, working together. What Doug Ford chose to do instead is call an election that puts us out of commission for about 4.5 weeks for the election. Then election night was last Thursday. Wow, it hasn't been on a few days.
Yeah.
Last Thursday, and so I'm right now I'm an MPP elect, even though I keep my title. I don't have the authority to do anything. I can't form bills and stuff until I'm gazetted, which is just a fancy way of they certify how many votes I have. Then I have to be sworn in. So I thought it was going to take us about 2 months. The reality, though, is Doug Ford just, I don't know if he leaked or it came out, we won't be returning to Queen's Park till middle of April. So we should be at Queen's Park right now, working for workers, making sure that workers are safe, making sure that there's assistance that goes on top of EI, so if workers are laid off or lose their jobs, they don't lose their houses, making sure they can make ends meet, doing something about affordable rent, building some affordable housing, because we're at the lowest housing starts in 60 years, attracting family doctors, funding places like NOSM, but instead, Doug Ford did something that was not about the people of Ontario, but was best for Doug Ford, securing an extra 2 years in his term. The reality is if he did a good job, he would pick up another 4 years at the normal election cycle, but instead he made it about himself. And he did it in an election where basically it was dark by 6 o'clock and you couldn't talk to voters. So he really did not want voter engagement. He didn't want the people of Ontario to give him a mandate, as he was saying, and I'll put that in quotes. This was a Doug Ford thing, Doug Ford being selfish and focused primarily on what was best for Doug Ford and not what was best for the people of Ontario.
Yeah. I want to talk best about the Vale's recent layoff of 200 workers. How did you plan to address these immediate needs of those impacted by job loss,
So, these 200 layoffs, they happened in the second week of the election. Right? And this was my frustration talking to voters, is that we're having this unnecessary elections and cost, at the time they were guessing between 175 to 200, I think the number is around 180 something, $1 million. Now, even if there weren't the layoffs, imagine the housing we could build with that, or imagine the food we could provide for people or for kids at school. We can do a lot of money, a lot of things with $100 million. We blew it on an election. Well, I'm not going to say we did. Doug Ford blew it on an election. He made the call as the premier. He should wear that. Now, along with this, you have 200 people at Vale being laid off. Now, some of that, I talked to the people at Vale who are in decision-making roles. There's government relations people, and they said some of it's restructuring, but some of it, of course, is also speculation of the future because nickel is struggling. There's a lot of flooding of nickel coming from Indonesia, helped with offsetting prices of China. And so nickel is a soft commodity right now, even though it's very valuable for the future. But for those workers who are being laid off for whatever reason, we know with tariffs coming that manufacturing, especially auto plants, mining, different sectors like this, we're going to be struggling. Instead of being there for workers, standing for workers, trying to figure out the best way to support them, in a very simple way, basically is if we can keep people in their houses, and so if we can help them continue to pay their mortgage or continue to pay rent, it's a lot cheaper than when all that falls apart and they're relying on the social safety net, right? And so we could be offsetting the amount that's available for EI. If you think of, we did this during COVID. We helped people stay in their house and get money so they can stay in place. The other part of it is that we should be putting money into reskilling workers so they can get into different jobs. And I don't know what those jobs look like because it's different for every single worker. but there is a dearth of skilled trades that are required. You know, there are a lot of people who could do a certain job or are expertise in their fields, say in mining, which could be applicable in other fields, and we could help them get from A to B. But right now, we're basically all put on the sidelines. You're talking about 124 members of the provincial legislative assembly from across the province, all on the sidelines at a point of tragedy and crisis. It's only because Donald Trump keeps changing his mind about putting in the tariffs or not that we're not feeling the full impact of this. But there's a ton of stress out there, and we should be all on the field working at this.
So in your victory speech, you declared that Sudbury now has a mandate for affordable rent, affordable groceries, affordable bills, and I'm gonna fight like hell to get that done. Given that you secured a narrow win against PC candidate Max Massimiliano, what immediate concrete policy measures will you introduce to turn this mandate into action for families struggling with soaring living costs right now?
I'll push back a little bit on a narrow win. It was narrow in comparison to previous, but it was more than 2,000 votes. It was 46% of the vote, and my highest was 47. In that election, what you saw basically is the Liberal candidate wasn't announced at 2 weeks in. The Liberal vote more or less collapsed, and some went Conservative and some went New Democrat. So I think that in a normal election, you'd see different results. I best off to anybody who runs it as a candidate, but I'm not planning on taking this laying down, and I'm planning to win the next time as well. But, Doug Ford kept saying, I need a mandate to handle Donald Trump. I needed a mandate. So let's start with his mandate for Donald Trump. Doug Ford is a Donald Trump cheerleader, and he's been on record several times. I'm a proud Republican. I like Donald Trump. I think he's smart. I mean, he likes to go on TV and news and say, I'm going to fight you and all this stuff. He said this about grocery gouging, right? I'll be all over you like a 5,000-pound, whatever, grizzly bear or whatever his quote was. If anyone's caught gouging in groceries, well, people are being gouged on groceries every single day since like COVID ended. It's still happening.
Yeah. Doug
Ford hasn't said a peep, right? So he's the sort of guy, and we all work with somebody like this who is all talk, no action, all sizzle, no steak. I'm hopeful he's going to do something, but you need solid planning and not just yelling and screaming. So when I talked about the mandate, he said, I need a strong mandate from the people of Ontario to tackle Doug Ford. Well, the people of Sudbury chose not to elect the Conservative candidate. So that tells me they believed in my mandate. And when I talked to people of Sudbury, what I was hearing, and it didn't matter, I heard from affluent people, I heard from seniors, students, young couples starting their first family, all saying, I cannot make ends meet, right? The best case scenario for a lot of people was that I barely cover food and hydro and rent, and that's it. I am so the story that really resonated with me, there's two of them. There was one was a senior couple. The husband, his entire pension check went towards rent. The wife's entire pension check went towards their bills, and they went to the food bank. They had no money for food at all. The second one was a single mom with two kids. She worked in healthcare. I think she was a nurse. I don't remember off the top of my head. But she said, everything that I make goes to bills, and I am so worried that my direct deposit will come after a bill shows up, and I'll bounce a check and bounce a bill, basically, and I don't have the money for an NSF charge, right? This is how tight the line is for people. When I was in my 20s, I had my own place. It was affordable. I paid all my bills. I had a little extra money at the end of the day, to do whatever I wanted with. I can go with friends and grab a pizza. That doesn't exist anymore for people. Mm-hmm. And so I think people are fed up with the premier. The Conservatives have been in power now 7 years. It's almost a decade. So you can be mad and blame the Liberals, for running the country in the ground or whatever the thing is when people are mad about Kathleen Wynne and Dalton McGuinty. It's been almost a decade. How come Doug Ford's not turning the ship around? How come more hospitals are having medicine? How come fewer people have doctors? Why are schools underfunded by $1,500? Why are more and more people going to food banks? More and more working people. 1 out of every 4 people at a food bank has a job or a series of jobs, right? And so what I'm saying is that the people of Sudbury, they wanted my mandate. My mandate where life becomes more affordable, where the government's on your side, And that's what I'm telling Doug Ford, and that's what I'll be standing for at Queen's Park.
So, to be specified, what immediate actions will you take to ensure family doctors for all, build affordable housing in the north, reinstate rent control, and then boost the Northern Health Travel grant?
A couple things is that I always believe it's more important to be propositional than oppositional, right? So propose ideas, because the government, especially in a majority government, they get to make all the decisions, right? But if you propose good ideas, they can adopt them. So one of the things I would say, let's say for doctors, for example, we're very fortunate in Sudbury to have the Northern Ontario School of Medicine. Now, they want to double the number of doctors graduating, and a majority of those will be family doctors. They graduate doctors from different fields. But if we can have 100 doctors graduating, we know that a lot of those doctors, 90% stay in Northern Ontario, and a good chunk of them stay in the Sudbury area. So if we're doubling the number of doctors, that's good for everybody in Northern Ontario, primarily in Sudbury, because I'm very hopeful they make connections and set roots down here, and maybe I'll be one of the people who gets a family doctor, because there's about 20,000 people here in Sudbury who don't, and I'm on that list. I don't have a family doctor either. So they need funding to do this. If you want to attract a family doctor who could teach to come to Sudbury, then they need to know a long-term commitment that we believe in them for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. What the Conservative government is committed to is 2 to 3 years. Well, we're not going to be able to attract someone to train doctors for 2 or 3 years. Family doctors are in great demand. They can go anywhere in Ontario, frankly, anywhere else in Canada. But they can go anywhere in Ontario. We need to be able to attract them to Sudbury. And so I'll be advocating on a regular basis. I'll be talking to the Minister of Health on a regular basis. I'll be bringing up a question period. Why don't you provide the funding that NOSM needs so that Northern Ontario can be successful? I want to just add on that. During the election, they were saying, you need to vote Conservative so you'll get stuff, so you'll have a voice at the table. I work with Conservatives from Southern Ontario and Northern Ontario. Conservatives never talk about the fact that hospitals are closing down their emergency rooms. Conservatives never talk about Minden Hospital, even though it's in a Conservative riding. They never mention that hospital was closed permanently. They don't talk about the doctor shortage. So because I'm in the opposition role, I'm allowed to say the things that they're not allowed to say. And I'm allowed to move things forward and put pressure on the government to make those changes. So that's how we tackle doctors in one step. There's other things that we could be doing. A really simple example for doctors is if we provided assistance for them to do their paperwork. They spend about 40% of their time doing paperwork. Admin assistants is a specialized field for that. Could do the paperwork for them. The doctor has to do a certain portion, but the admin assistant could do the rest. We tried to bring this forward as an opposition motion from the NDP. The Conservative government, for some reason, voted it down, even though you basically would have more time face-to-face. The doctors don't want to do the paperwork. They want to do healthcare and treat with people.
Absolutely, yeah.
So that's how we would tackle with healthcare. With the doctor shortage. I forget what the other ones were, sorry.
So I jump into another one. This is also
Sure.
another concern, one of the concern of Canadian right now. The US implementing 25% tariffs on Canadian imports of as of March 4, 2025, and China, on the other hand, imposing 100% tariffs on Canadian agricultural products starting March 2025. How do you plan to address these escalating trade tensions, and specifically, what measures will you advocate to protect Sudbury's economy and help local industries at the same time residents prepare for the potential economic impact?
I think that short term, and it's going to benefit us. At some point, Donald Trump won't be president anymore. We won't be talking about tariffs, right? In a short amount of time or a long amount of time, within 4 years, he won't be president. I heard a joke today on a news sort of like quiz program, and they said if Donald Trump's business ventures or anything go forward, that this will fail within 3 years, which I thought was sort of funny. But the reality is tariffs won't be funny. It's a stressful time for people, and it's making the stock market do all kinds of weird things. I think I'm an optimist, right? So I always see the silver lining. One thing I think is going to be important is that we've become stronger as Canadians and more Canadian focused. I think during COVID we became a little bit fractured, and we ended up in these little bubbles of opinions, and there were some Canadians who felt like they're better than other Canadians, and I feel like we're more united now. Those expressions like elbows up and a lot of Canadian pride, which is great. But we're also going to be focusing on who else can we have as trade partners. So once our relationship with the Americans gets stronger, we're going to have stronger relationship with Australia, the UK, Africa as we venture out for new trade partners. So that'll be great as well. There's been some interprovincial trade barriers in place. We're finally going to start having conversations with them. I think that in the past it's been tricky, and it's fine. We could trade with the Americans. We don't have to trade back and forth. We'll put that off to another day. Well, another day's come here, so in the future we'll be stronger. Also, I love the idea, and I know Marit Stiles, as our leader, had proposed this, that we start shopping locally. So for government entities, government supported things, how do we prove that we're shopping locally in the province, locally in Canada before going externally? How do we build our own economy, keep our economic engine going? So I think that's really important as well. And when you talked about agriculture, I thought about, I'm a big fan of the Sudbury market. I think it's really important to shop local and support local. It's very affordable. It's incredibly affordable. It's more convenient to go somewhere else. But when you think of downtown, you have free parking downtown. You go in, the farmers who are there, and you're helping a local business stay in business. And so selling and supporting local is one way that we can really help in the short term.
All right, and the Liberal Party is set to announce a new leader today. Who will, ultimately becomes Canada's next prime ministers? So how do you plan to collaborate with the incoming administration to address the escalating trade tensions with the US, including recent threats of increased tariffs, and ensure the protections of Sudbury's economic interests?
Yeah, so it'll be interesting because I've heard rumors. So leading up to this, just so everyone's on the same page, before Justin Trudeau stepped down, there was a threat of a immediate federal election, and I think the Trudeau stepping down allowed tensions to cool a little bit, right? So maybe there'll be an election, maybe they won't, but I have heard that certain of the front runners for the Liberal Party they haven't publicly said it, but the rumor is they may trigger the election themselves. I don't know if it's a wise move, because that'll take the federal party on the sidelines for an election period, right? And I know people are hungry for an election, but what is the best decision for Canadians? That's at a federal level to make. But I like the idea of people staying focused and working locally. We've already said as New Democrats, we want to work with all the provinces. We want to have a Team Canada approach, work with the government. It doesn't matter who the government is in power. Federally, we want to work with them. I think that provincially, we sometimes seem a little bit scattered, right? Daniel Smith in Alberta is saying one thing, Doug Ford in Ontario is saying something different. I can't remember his name, but the Premier of Newfoundland, I believe, just stepped down and said, I don't want to deal with Donald Trump, And so we need that united front all coming together. The thing that I think that Doug Ford's not doing really well when it comes to this is it's very satisfying to puff your chest up and make threats and throw punches and that sort of thing. But it is not a great way to negotiate, especially with someone like Donald Trump, who is very egotistical, very arrogant, And so I think that instead of threatening, we're going to, cut off nickel exports, we're going to cut off electricity. It's better to talk about how important nickel exports are to the Americans. You may have to cut off things or add tariffs to it, but it's better to explain than to just threaten, because I don't think that Donald Trump responds well to threats. I think he responds a little better to flattery and explaining things.
Just a question, the primary contenders for the Liberal leaderships are former Central Bank Governor Mark Carney, ex-Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland, and former Cabinet Minister Carnea Gold. So who do you think is going to be the best person as the country's Prime Minister?
I don't know, and it's a couple of reasons. It's out of my lane because I'm provincial, they're federal. The other one is it's a different party. And sometimes, the reality in parties is that the best person may not win. The members of that party choose who the leader is, right? And so in 2022, for example, the provincial Liberals, they had elected, oh my goodness, I just forgot his name. I can picture him. I'll come back to it.
Sure.
So they elected a new leader, but he lacked the charisma that people I think would want to be drawn to the leader, right? And I'm not saying he's not a good politician, not a smart guy or anything, but he didn't have that. Doug Ford has a lot of charisma. Justin Trudeau has a lot of charisma. Even Pierre Poilievre, I'm not a Pierre Poilievre guy, but he has a certain amount of charisma to him. And they elected, really bothered me, I can't remember his name, but he didn't really have that charisma sort of to unite people and attract people. But it's who their members chose. They ran a strong campaign out of his campaign, and he became the leader. But the result basically is they lost seats. They didn't do well. He didn't gain his seat, and he had to resign as the leader. And so I think that I am hopeful, even though it's a different party, they have a really good leader because it's what's best for Canada in this place. I want them to be strong and successful. I am a New Democrat, but I also I recognize the role of the Prime Minister, the ministers. I want them to do well because it's what we need right now.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Moving ahead, I have some more concerns about immigrants and international students as well. Sure. This time around. Sudbury's immigrants, refugees, and international students community facing employment challenges due to limited Canadian experience and language barriers as well, alongside rising living costs. So, what steps is the provincial government taking to address the unique challenges faced by immigrants and international students here in Sudbury?
Well, there's a couple of things, and I think there's work that can be done at a faster pace. One of them is finding ways to recognize foreign credentials locally. And if there is a gap, finding ways that we can bridge that gap so the skills match, right? I'll give you an example. I was at Cambrian College. They had a mental health event, and one of the students who was volunteering to help host it, he was doing his dental assistant program out of it. So the student was from India. He was not only a dentist in India, he helped run he had 4 or 5 different dental clinics that he ran. And I said, well, how different are teeth in India than here? And he said, well, teeth are the same, but some of the procedures are different. Mm-hmm. So he's doing the dental administrative side of it so he can get on his feet, so he can become qualified as a dentist again. I think that if there is a way that we can adapt that training, so the qualifications to be a dentist in India, instead of going right back to the beginning for dental school, that you could do, a 1-year, 2-year upgrade course. I'm not saying to diminish it, but just if you can prove you can do the same training and recognize the training, that's better for everybody, right? Yeah. And similarly, when it comes to doctors or tradespeople or any of these different fields. So there's been a lot of talk provincially from the Conservatives about this. There hasn't been a lot happening on this. And I have to give credit to Dolly Begum. She's the MPP for Scarborough Southwest. This has become a passionate project for her. A lot of immigrants in her riding. And Daldi is our first Bengali MPP in the province's history. And so she recognized how important this is for immigrant people to have that gap. The other thing as well is that there's a lot of misinformation about immigration, right? And you heard this, Donald Trump really used immigration as a way to scare people into voting for him, right? They're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats, that kind of stuff, which is very hurtful. But even during the election, I would hear from people who would say, it's not that I'm racist, but I think we maybe let too many immigrants in. And, that's why we're having these housing problems. Well, we do have immigrants here and they're taking housing as well, but the reality is housing at its lowest level in 60 years. That instead of focusing on building housing, affordable housing, Doug Ford got rid of rent control. And that's brought the price of housing up. His focus has been primarily on redoing the Greenbelt, and now there's RCMP investigation, or building housing that would be the most expensive, with this idea that it'll trickle down, the price will drop as if we're building fidget spinners and 1,000 are coming off every hour, right? That's not going to happen. And so we need to focus on building housing that's available. So I think if we focus on that skill development and how it goes across, it's good for our country because we have more people in skilled jobs, but it's also good for people who are coming here through immigration because we have such high standards to come in as an immigrant. And then so you have people working in the roles they're qualified for, right? When you are an immigrant and you have you're an engineer, you have post-secondary, but you're driving an Uber. Mm-hmm. It's very difficult, right? When you know your potential, not just for earning, but your potential to do work, is so much higher, but you're working in a minimum wage job, a low skilled job, but you have a high skill, it's mentally difficult on that person, and also their ability to earn income isn't where it is. And when you have a better income source, you spend more money in your community. It all comes back in. I've never been a trickle down person. I don't think that if we give all our money to rich people, it trickles down. If that would have worked, it would have worked, in the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s. It hasn't. More and more people are falling to the bottom, and rich people are getting richer and richer. You want to drive the economy, you put more money in people's pockets. I used to say in the old days, it's the difference between an iPhone and a flip phone, right? People will spend money. Instead of going to the food bank to buy groceries, if they have enough money, instead of groceries, they go to a restaurant. That all drives a circular economy that goes up.
Absolutely.
And I think that's the benefit. And so I think at the core, we really need to have frank conversations about immigration, what immigrants bring to our city, how valuable they are. I think we have to get rid of that idea that immigrants are sneaking in, that they're not skilled, they don't know what they're doing. That's all nonsense, and we have to have frank conversations about it. And we need to focus on the things that everyone needs. Everyone needs housing. Everyone needs doctors. And instead of taking accountability for shortcomings of governments of the past or present, I find more and more there's some unscrupulous politicians who will point at immigrants and say they're the problem. I mean, Donald Trump's the worst example, but there are other politicians locally who are doing that, who are saying, not locally Sudbury, locally Ontario, locally in Canada, who are saying, the problem is these people. And we've seen this in Sudbury before, right? When I was a kid or before I was born, these people were French people or Italian people or Ukrainian people. Right? Blaming immigrants is nothing new. I'm not falling for it again. So we all need to educate our neighbors and have frank conversations. And sometimes they'll push back and they'll say, "Hey, but what about this? What about this?" And we need to listen to each other, but also educate each other so we understand the benefits of what's happening.
So, on the other hand, Sudbury, like many communities, has growing populations of immigrants, refugees, and international students who contribute significantly to the city's cultural diversities. However, these individuals have faced challenges related to discrimination and racism. That's a bitter truth, in workplace or in public place and in different places as well. So, which can, affect their sense of belonging and well-being at the same time. So, given this, how is the provincial government addressing concern around discriminations and racism that immigrants and international students may face in Sudbury, and what specific programs are in place to ensure they feel safe and protected in the community?
Well, I'll just say, and it's going to sound negative because I'm an opposition member, and I'm not trying to be oppositional about this, but they aren't doing enough. There was a bill, I can't remember the title, the name of it, but basically it was about racism in post-secondary schools. And nothing in the bill was new. All of these things already exist under the Post-Secondary Schools Act to tackle racism, to investigate, to educate, all these different things. And students came in and teachers came in talking about racism that they faced, right? Real concrete examples, heartbreaking examples that you wouldn't want your kids to face or yourself to face, right? And something that was reflective of a world I don't want to be part of, right? I want to be part of that we're more accepting and welcoming. But the root of this really came down to, like, the Conservatives would say, well, what do you think of the bill that's going to do all these things? And people who are educated, well educated on the legislation, previous legislation, would say, these exist, but you don't give us money to do them, right? So right now in Ontario, post-secondary schools have the lowest level of provincial funding and the highest tuition rates. The tuition's been frozen, but there's no money to offset it. So as cost of living goes up, it becomes more and more difficult for post-secondary schools to make ends meet. So that means they cut student support. They're not able to fund properly the investigation on harassment, which includes sexual harassment, on racist comments, on education, on teaching about diversity, and so we really, not to quote Tom Cruise's character in that movie, but like, show me the money, right? If we're serious about this, we got to do more than thoughts and prayers in a speech about how important it is to tackle racism. We got to put money towards it. One of the things that I thought was I was very thankful about when I was first elected in 2018. Jagmeet Singh was coming through Sudbury on his way to Manitoulin. He was going on vacation, and his brother called me and said, do you want to go for lunch? So we went to Tuco's Tacos, and this is 7 years ago, and there weren't as many people wearing turbans then as there is now, right? It's much more common to see now. Not that it wasn't, but there weren't as many. And so we're at Tuco's Tacos. I grew up in the Donovan, right? And people were looking at him, while they were ordering, while they were waiting. And then, Jagmeet went over and he was like, "Oh, let me introduce myself. I'm Jagmeet Singh." And they started asking questions like, "What does the turban? How come your turban goes straight up, but some turbans go out to the side?" And so, I was proud of a neighborhood I grew up in that the conversations weren't racist ones; they were curious ones. They were staring because he looked different than people he'd seen before, but they wanted to know, like, what does this mean? And you have that bracelet. What does the bracelet mean? And then, so what is Sikh Muslim? Is that the same thing? And so I think the more you learn, the less room there is for hate, right? And I think that it sounds very simplistic, but the festivals that we have in our community, the Chinese festival, Afrofest, all these different festivals that we have, there's always food involved.
Right.
And when you're eating together, it is hard to be angry together, right? It's a fun experience to try food from somewhere else, and it's I love all kinds of food, but like some people it's too spicy or they don't like the texture or whatever else. But trying it opens up that conversation, right? In the same way when immigrants are trying food that's traditionally Canadian, like a poutine or something, right? And getting the reactions, it's hard to be mad at somebody when you're sharing a meal. And so I think that, I made a very long answer, but the two short versions are, we have to put money into this if we really care about this, right? We're seeing a rise in racism. We're seeing a rise in anti-Semitism. All these things that we had left not behind, but, we thought we're going to start fading off as we got to know each other better. So we need to put money in it. We need to have real conversations, and we need to have meals together and learn about each other's culture in a fun way. Because it is fun.
Absolutely, learn about each other's cultures. All right, almost at the end, and as a human rights advocate and mental health background, the interconnected issues of homelessness, mental health issues, and substance abuse. How is the provincial government working with local law enforcement and community organizations to ensure public safety while addressing the needs of vulnerable individuals?
Yeah, that's a system I think they're not doing very effectively. I'm disappointed in I don't know if he'll still be the Associate Minister of Mental Health and Addictions, because he does have a doctorate in this, and I think he, would be more educated than I am on it. So Doug Ford and the Conservatives have come into a very sort of law and order approach. And don't get me wrong, I want people to feel safe. It really is I grew up near downtown. As a teenager, we had the house that was people who lived there a long time across the street from the old Y on Lloyd Street, and I used to do all my Christmas shopping downtown. I almost never went shopping in New Sudbury because my mom didn't have a car, and so it was take a bus downtown, take a bus out there, that kind of thing. And the world downtown looks a lot different than it used to. It's still thriving, but I'd be kidding you if I said there's not a lot of struggle and visible poverty. So we need to really tackle this, and we cannot solve this by jailing people. It does not matter. When you're living with a heavy addiction, you don't care if you're in jail, right? You're going to come out of jail and use again. And the reality in jails, people can get drugs there too, right? And so we have to think about this holistically, and the fact that the way we're approaching it right now isn't cost effective. We're overwhelming our police, our firefighters, our paramedics have to respond to overdose calls. We're overwhelming the hospitals who are dealing with this, as well as people who are homeless, who typically have a lot of foot injuries and things like that from walking around all the time. It's unsafe for people to be living in the bush. This didn't exist when I was a kid. We had homeless people, for sure. We had people who were living rough, that sort of thing, but this visible poverty didn't exist. And we need to tackle the mental health side of it. But what's really interesting is before the election, I was trying to wrap my head around what the best steps are going forward. And every organization, public health, the Nurses Association, the hospitals, we're all saying the best thing you can do is housing. If we can keep people in their housing, right? Because once you're unhoused, once you're living on the streets, it's all about survival, right? And the mental health goes high, and then addictions becomes a way to self-medicate, right? So it can be alcohol or drugs, but it's a way to escape from how terrible your life has become, how overwhelming it is. If we can keep people in their houses, that means that there's less stress on them. It's that whole Maslow's mountain of needs. So food and housing are the first ones. If you're not struggling for those, then you can provide services for addiction treatment and recovery, and that takes money. There's a big announcement for the heart houses locally, which I'm happy for, but we really need to have a real focus on this, and thinking if people don't quit, we'll put them in jail will work. It just won't. The data shows already it won't work. I don't want to go through another 5 years to show that it didn't work this time.
Almost at the end, before we leave, as the lifelong Sudburyan, what's your favorite thing about Sudbury, and how does it inspire you to represent the community and consistently working to improve the lives of those in your community?
There's two things kind of mixed together. One is that Sudbury time and time again shows it's a community that cares. I was just at the Special Olympics polar plunge. We set a fundraising record, and we set a participant record. More participants than ever jumped in freezing cold water as one of those people. And so that caring show, it just again and again and again we show that we care. The other thing too is that Sudbury really is a community that punches above their weight. That years ago the provincial government said we wouldn't have a cancer center, and we would not accept that, and we have a cancer center. The same with their PET scanner, right? They said we wouldn't have one, you have to raise this much money, so we raised it. Then they raised the bar, said no, we meant this much money, we raised that much money, and now we have this PET scanner. The same when it comes to, we have CROSH, the Center for Research on Occupational Safety and Health. That was an idea that someone dreamed up. Mark Cutifani, Leo Gerard one day had this idea, and now they're just getting closer, celebrating their 15th year anniversary. Indie Cinema is a good example of that. So this is a community that maybe it's because we start off making our living by carving through hard rock, but we believe in setting goals and getting them no matter how hard it is or how difficult it is. And that's the thing that inspires me here, is we care about each other, and we set what sometimes feels like impossible goals for other people, and we're very determined to get them done. And it makes my job as a politician about bragging about my city and supporting my city really, really easy, because the people here inspire me.
Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for blessing our show.
Oh, for sure. Thanks for having me anytime.
Thank you.